Most companies don't have a revenue problem, they have an operational problem. My guest today, Eddie Reynolds, is the CEO of Union Square Consulting and the host of the GTM Science podcast. He has spent the last decade helping CROs and revenue teams rebuild the systems that drive growth, not just adding tools or headcount. Eddie has built two frameworks that are shaking up the B2B SaaS world that we're going to talk about today. The first is the GTM Ops Decision Tree, which helps leaders isolate what's really broken. And the second is the GTM Efficiency Pyramid, which is a blueprint for fixing it in sequence. In today's episode, we also talk about why so many teams chase more pipeline instead of just fixing their process, how to separate renewals from expansions, and what operational maturity actually looks like when it's done right. I hope you enjoy this episode of Account Management Secrets. If you're an account manager, you already know this. You're the one keeping the business running. You own the client relationships, drive the revenue, and solve the tough problems for your customers. But here's the challenge. Most companies don't give account managers the training or recognition they deserve. That's what you'll get here on the Account Management Secrets podcast. I'm Alex Raymond, and after working with thousands of account managers, I know what separates the best from the rest. In this show, we cover exactly what you need to succeed, handling tough client conversations, driving renewals and upsells with confidence, and proving your value every single day. There's no fluff, no outdated sales tactics, just real practical strategies you can use right now to grow your accounts and build a successful career. If that sounds like what you've been looking for, hit subscribe and let's get into it. And we are off. Hey, Eddie, great to see you. Thanks for joining me. 2025 has been a weird year, right? There's new sales, without a doubt, is slower, harder, less efficient, costs more than it basically ever has. That's raising the stakes for account managers. So they're feeling more pressure, right? There's more pressure to deliver gross revenue retention, net revenue retention, just more money back into the business because of the fact that new business is pretty shaky right now. And in one of the recurring themes in your work that I'd love to start off with is, where is the problem, right? If we say we have a revenue problem or we have a profit problem, where does that actually begin? And where are we incorrectly pointing fingers at one another? Let's just open up and share what's your perspective on all this.
This is a really big topic, right? So in terms of what's going on in the market, let's start there. I'm seeing what you're seeing. It's really difficult and more specifically expensive to land new customers. And so there's increasing pressure and also success in terms of driving revenue through existing customers, whether that is because it's so much harder to bring in new business. I don't know, but like you're seeing like organizations, the majority of like revenue growth is coming from existing customers right now. And I mentioned to you before we jumped in that I've only ever had one job in sales. I spent my entire career in sales prior to starting this company. I've only had one job in sales where I was strictly new business. So I've always been in a situation where I'm looking at existing customers and cold prospects and looking at this and going, well, who's going to be easier to sell to? It's obviously existing customers. When I was at Salesforce for 3 years, I sold to new business and existing, and it's just very obvious that retaining and growing an existing customer is going to be cheaper and easier. And we see this in hard metrics. I posted something the other day with some data from David Spitz at BenchSites that the average company, public SaaS company, spends $2.07 to grow ARR by $1 today. It used to be, I believe, $1.24, $1.26, something like that in 2021. I mean, that is a drastic degradation of the effectiveness of go-to-market. And part of this is process. Part of this is the stuff that we scream from the rooftops. But that's not all of it. The economy obviously has an impact. The value of products. When a company is looking at something and saying this product doesn't deliver that much value to us, and like the economy's tougher right now, and we need to like look for ways to cut costs, regardless of your go-to-market motion or your customer success and account management motions, you're going to feel that, right? But in my world, in my purview, I am focused on how well is the engine running. like independent of what's happening in the economy and the product, things that are above my pay grade, how can we build a better go-to-market engine? And despite all of this talk about profitable, efficient growth and the death of growth at all costs, we still see a broken go-to-market in most companies, because I think go-to-market over the last 10, 20 years has just gotten incredibly complicated and interconnected, lots of technology, lots of data, lots of processes, and RevOps hasn't caught up with that. And as a result, you have customers churning, as an example, because nobody scheduled a QBR with them. Nobody reached out to them until a month before the renewal, and they sent a canned email to say, hey, do you want to renew with us or not? Like, there's basic steps that are obvious to everyone that need to get fixed, but those steps don't get fixed because people are really busy doing other things. And I'm guilty of that, just like anybody else. You pointed out that I have a broken link on my LinkedIn, and I'm putting out all this content and trying to get people to my LinkedIn, and I got a broken link. So I got to go fix that. And I think this is the case in large go-to-market organizations as well. Like, these are not things that are, beyond someone's comprehension. When you point them out, they're really obvious, but organizations are busy. There's a lot going on, and fundamental steps in the go-to-market process get broken and remain broken.
Are we thinking that RevOps is just an area that we're underinvesting in? Did it all get way too complicated? Are we not working with RevOps properly? Because I hear kind of you pointing to, hey, RevOps is a thing. It's the engine that's going to help make all this stuff better. It's not going to necessarily help with some of the macro stuff or bigger picture, what's going on in the market, but it will make us more effective and more efficient. In my experience with account management teams, there's not a very good understanding of how to work with RevOps, what we can do together, what the two-way contracts look like, for example. And I'm wondering whether we need a little bit of a reset or a definition on how best to work with that group.
Every organization and person I come across that has this moniker of RevOps has a wide spectrum of possible responsibilities. There are VPs of RevOps that are strategic folks that have an MBA, that understand go-to-market, that sit around thinking about how do we grow revenue. And there are VPs of RevOps that grew up, as Salesforce admins and Marketo admins, and that is still the majority of what they spend their time on. So just the term RevOps alone is basically meaningless to me. You might notice that we're starting to rebrand as go-to-market ops, but there's no title that we can give the work that we do that means anything to anybody. So that's problem number one. But let me simplify the solution to the problem that you're articulating. If we are talking about net revenue retention, or specifically account management, this is as simple as, do we have a step-by-step process outlined for how we manage accounts? And does everybody understand what that process is? And do we have some systems in place? And when I say systems, I mean both software and the broader concept of a system, a repeatable process. Do we have systems in place for our account management team to go and execute those steps? So if, for example, we say that the best way for us to make our customers successful is to make sure that we have a QBR every quarter, is that happening? Is there a report? And I really don't care if that report is in Salesforce and some other tool, or if you've drawn it on the wall. I really don't care. Is there a report somewhere where I can see that we've done QBRs for all of our clients? Because you're telling me this is the number one thing that makes or breaks our success with a customer. Do we have some accountability to getting that done? And then we can go back into how we do onboarding and implementations and how we make these customers healthy in the first place. But what are those steps? And because we also implement these tools, it's kind of ironic that we talk about net revenue retention and account management and all these things from my experience, in the trenches, working at Salesforce and other organizations. But also for the last 9 years, we've been implementing Salesforce and Marketo and HubSpot for all these organizations. And we could see the difference between a successful onboarding and an unsuccessful one. And there are very granular steps in that process that we have spent years and continue to iterate upon, because it's not easy. But a lot of organizations, including, I'll go off on a soapbox for a moment. I absolutely lost my mind at Salesforce. We acquired a company called Desk.com. And I remember I was having trouble with one of my customers getting onboarded, and I called like the desk.com implementation team. And I'm so glad this company doesn't exist anymore. And I'm like, where's like the statement of work for them? And the person responded to me, what's a statement of work? And I'm like, you work on an implementations team and no one has explained to you what a statement of work is. And I'm just like, it blew my mind. I mean, this is like, unfortunately, startup culture. And I hate to be like so negative and just like throw shade at this company. But like, I had a really terrible experience where one of my customers went through not one, but two implementations with this company over the course of a year. And both of them failed. And it was like, well, we don't even have the steps mapped out for like what we need to do to get this customer from signing a contract to becoming a healthy user of our software.
That's a problem. That's a big issue. Yeah. And when you're talking about process, so you say it would be nice if the account management team said, you know, what's our process for QBRs? And then we have reports on it and so on. You know, I've been in this space for a long time. I've seen a lot of the innards of companies and how they work on this stuff. I would tell you that, you know, most people don't have this very well defined, right? For the most part, and any of the critical functions of the account management team, which can include quarterly business reviews, customer segmentation, how often we do account planning, how we do account reviews, handoffs between sales and account management, for example. Those are very important, like operational behaviors. And the number of companies that have those defined, dialed in, and reportable is very, very small. What's your experience, Ben? Do you share that experience?
Absolutely. And I also share the opposite experience. When I came into Salesforce, I mean, my experience at Salesforce is what inspired me to start this company, because Salesforce is not perfect, especially these days. Like, I've become less and less of a fan of certain things that Salesforce is doing. But like as a revenue organization, I think it's hard to argue that they don't have things fairly well dialed in aggregate. And I came in the door and it's like, here is your territory. Here is a bunch of data in the CRM about all the accounts that are currently customers that are assigned to you. Here's literally a report of the SIC codes and NIAX codes of the industries that buy the most from Salesforce, and you can cross-reference that against your territory. And on day one, you're going to sit down and you're going to take all this information and you're going to talk to the previous AE that covered this territory, and you're going to slice and dice your account list and you're going to segment them into tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. You're then going to look at what products do they have and what product white space do they have, and what stakeholders do we have relationships with, and what stakeholders do we not. And we've come out with some content where I've coined this as like stakeholder white space. I don't know what other folks call it, but that to me was incredibly powerful. I mean, as you can imagine, like I worked at Salesforce from like 2013 to 2016, if I remember correctly. So it's been a while. Most of our customers, especially in New York, where ironically, like the New York office was really small when I started. So it was just a bunch of VPs of sales that had bought the sales tool, but we were tasked with selling the marketing tool, the service tool, and all the other tools that Salesforce acquired. And so it's like, well, we don't have a relationship with the head of customer success. We don't have a relationship with the CMO. We don't have a relationship with the CFO or the COO. And then there's many other stakeholders in different organizations. And so you're looking at this and you're saying like, how do I broaden this relationship? And because Salesforce had this so dialed in, it was like, here's the playbook, here's the instructional manual. Now, when I'm sitting there as an AE/AM staring at an account, trying to figure out like, how do I grow this account? There's lots of nuance. I'm not suggesting that like we have a playbook that's like 150 pages long, but like the things that you list off, like how do we do an account review? How do we do a QBR? What things should I be looking for in an account to even identify who to talk to and what to talk to them about? This was all served up to me on a silver platter like the day I walked in the door. And I had come from a startup previous to Salesforce where I literally had to figure all this stuff out from zero.
And so what are you seeing out there now? So yes, companies like Salesforce have this dialed in. Where's everyone else on the spectrum?
The companies that I talk to, I will say, like, you might notice I don't put out a ton of content on customer success. Now, I don't know if this is like the way I've built my audience, but I tend to see that even talking about customer success doesn't get nearly as much attention as when I talk about like new business sales and marketing. There is a feeling that customer success and account management get severely neglected. And I was talking to one of our VPs of RevOps the other day about this, and he's like, well, part of that is that it's really easy to measure new business acquisition and new business CAC payback, et cetera. It's really difficult to measure dollars in, dollars out on net revenue retention, right? I mean, we've written articles about how we think like LTV is BS, and how this is like a metric that like really doesn't tell us anything. It's like, how do you quantify the amount of money that I'm going to pour into customer success and what I'm getting back for that, especially if NRR is less than 100%. And now it's like, okay, I paid X dollars for revenue to shrink. And I think that like CFOs and organizations as a whole look at customer success as like, this is a cost center for us instead of a revenue center, which I think is incredibly short-sighted. But I empathize with CFOs that are like, look, we only have so much capital to put to work, and we have to be really careful with where we put that capital, which translates to headcount. But I think that a lot of customer service teams or customer success teams are understaffed. And maybe the reason that they send out that templated email is because they're covering 1,000 accounts, and that's the only thing they can do.
And look, what you just articulated here is at the heart of a major issue for post sales. Okay, and here's the issue. You encapsulated well. Here's the issue. Sales gets all the money, all the glory, all the resources, all the budget, and yet in a good year delivers 29% of total revenue. In a year like 2025, it's probably going to be closer to 20% of total revenue comes from new sales. As you mentioned yourself, in 2024 was the first year, according to the EBSTA data. We had Guy Rubin on the podcast a while ago. According to the EBSTA data, 52% of net new revenue came from existing customers over new customers. Right. So literally,
can you help me understand that? Because that's the stat I was citing earlier, that like more than 50% of revenue is coming from existing. But can you explain to me, if it's okay for me to ask you a question, how that correlates with only 20% or 25% or whatever that you mentioned prior to that?
Yeah. The distinction is total revenue versus net new revenue. So my total revenue is $100 million. Any given year, approximately 71% of my revenue is going to come from my existing customers because they're buying stuff and we're delivering services. So we're accruing revenue. So on any given year, I've got 71% coming from my base and 29% of revenue coming from new customers. The net new is that 29%, right? 29% is the net new. In 2024, according to the EBSTA GTM benchmark data that they put out with Pavilion, that was the first year that of that 29, 52% of it came from existing customers. So more than half of what we would call net new revenue, so not stuff that was already baked into the gross revenue retention, the net new revenue, more than half of that came from existing customers versus the entire combined efforts of sales and marketing.
I mean, it's just interesting to me because like in my past roles, I've worked in software, I worked in finance, I've worked in a number of different industries. It's always been easier to sell and grow existing customers. And I've only had the one job where I was only new business. And I was like the first AE in a startup. And that was one of my first questions as CEO, like, why am I not calling on our existing customers? Like, it's the easiest people to sell to. Like, why would you want me making cold calls when I could just call an existing customer and they're going to answer the phone?
So this is at the heart. This is at the heart of this issue. Right. So sales gets all the glory and all the resources. And at the same time, the CS or account management teams are delivering more revenue. So uniformly more revenue, even now more new revenue. And importantly, all of the profit, like literally 100% of the profit, because as you mentioned before, it costs you a lot of money to acquire a new customer. So you're in a negative profit situation for a while. So they're delivering all the profit and most of the revenue. And yet, CFOs still, like you're saying, look at them like a cost center, still don't fully get the big picture of all the value that these teams are providing. I call this the curse of the unsung hero, right? We do a lot of work without a lot of recognition. That's the curse of the unsung hero for these account managers. What's your sense of like what's actually going on here and how to shift that conversation?
So I think part of what's actually going on here is it's hard to measure. I'm actually trying to wrap my head around this from a finance perspective. And so for background, I studied finance in college. I worked in financial services, like basically banking, private equity for like 10 years. I know my way around, financial statements pretty well. But this is something I don't quite understand as of today, is how do we measure just customer success? From a financial perspective, I've had a couple conversations over the last couple of days where people are saying, well, okay, well, you're an AE at Salesforce. Like I explained, like what percentage of your time was on new business and what percentage of your time was on expansion? And then how much of that expansion came back? And then how much did we spend on marketing and how much marketing went to our existing customers versus our new customers? And it becomes really hard to measure, right? Whereas we can just say, oh, okay, we have a sales and marketing organization that brings in like new customers and we spent $33 million in our $100 million company. I'm just citing stats that like the public companies are spending 33% of revenue. So we spent $33 million and we grew revenue by 20 million. So there's our CAC payback. We can do the math there. But if we try to figure that out for expansion, it becomes more difficult just to quantify the data. And I've never been a CFO, so I can't speak to this in depth, but it makes sense to me intuitively that like we probably don't know exactly what we're spending to expand accounts versus like what is customer service and what is just account management to try to like maintain that renewal. But this is something I'm actively trying to understand myself. But it makes sense to me at this moment to say, okay, well, if this is murky and hard to measure, then it's harder for a CFO to justify increasing budget for customer success.
I'll share that I think there's an organizational design issue going on here too. And I'll also share what I believe a prescription to solve it is. So I want to get your point of view on this here, Eddie. So yes, absolutely right. One of the issues is it's hard for us to measure what's going in, what's coming out. Now, I can see on the new business side, did we close new deals? Are we adding? Did we win the customer? Are we adding this new revenue lines and so on? And I think one of the big issues that we're having is, and for post sales, is we deliver revenue, like I was just saying. We deliver all the profits of the company, like I was just saying, and yet that team often doesn't exist in the revenue umbrella. The CRO is usually in charge of new business sales, and post sales can belong in ops or in some other thing. So I think a big part of what we need to do is put all the revenue under the CRO. So I believe that instead of having chief customer officers and having people running around who are doing anything other than reporting to the CRO, I think we need to merge that into the CRO organization. So you've got a CRO who then has a head of new business sales and a head of existing customer sales, or what I would call growth. So we got a head of growth and a head of new business, everyone rolling up. That way, the CRO says, I'm in charge of all revenue, and they can then report on it. They can see it. They can get credit. The incentives are therefore more aligned. Now, this can put a lot of people's nose out of joint because they say, well, customer success account management is different. And, we want to be over here. We're used to doing it this way. But I think if we want this area to survive and thrive and really get the recognition it deserves and make the impact that it can, that seems like a plausible alternative to me.
I think about this a lot. There's just this default of like the CRO should own everything. And I'm seeing more CROs take over CS. And I think it kind of makes sense because they've got this expansion muscle in place. But then it begs the question of like, well, who is actually responsible for driving the most revenue? Is it that sales motion, whether it be new business sales or, like an expansion sales motion? Or is it that we know how to like take care of our customers and nurture and grow them? Or is it our marketing engine? And it really begs the question of like, if we're going to take a CRO that 99% of them are salespeople, and I don't have anything against salespeople, I'm one of them, but now you're going to be elevated into this position where you're overseeing all of go-to-market. And if all of your customers are coming in because you have an amazing marketing engine.
I've had people on this podcast, like I'm thinking of Mike Rapp from IntelliPeer, who came up from an account management background, right? Account manager, strategic account manager, ran an account management team, and then now is a CRO with, guess what? The new business sales reporting to him as well. I don't think the marketing does in his instant. I think marketing is kind of separate, but now all revenue is under a single leader, and he can then make resource allocations and all the decisions that he needs to with single ownership of that number.
Well, this is obviously something that we've been a big fan of because from an ops perspective, like if your mandate, like our desired mandate is that we help build the go-to-market engine across marketing, sales, and CS. We need to connect the dots. We need a single North Star. We need everybody thinking about how do we drive ARR, not just leads, not just pipeline, not just renewals, not just new business, but like who is the ICP of the customer that is the easiest and cheapest for us to bring into the organization and retain and grow? And how do we do that? What is a step-by-step process? And it is really difficult to solve that problem if you've got multiple different masters to serve. The CMO is like got an MQL goal, and the CRO has a new business goal, and the head of CS has to like retain and grow customers who are coming in the door and they're not even the right ICP. That becomes mission impossible. So we as operators want to have like this single person who's responsible for all of go-to-market, but I think the debate is like what background is right for that.
So what's the path toward operational maturity here?
So you and I, before we started recording, talked about the content we came out with, the go-to-market ops decision tree. We'll get CROs and other revenue leaders come to us and they'll say, we've got all of these problems across go-to-market. And they'll say, well, like we're not like doing QBRs, and we don't have any way to track that. And then we've got these leads coming in that like aren't getting followed up on, and we're just like all over the place. It's like whack-a-mole. And it took me years to like figure out how to respond to this because it's really confusing. And so you say, okay, so we've got a million problems. How do we narrow our focus? We have to start with what's the thing that if we fix, it's going to drive the most revenue, either because it's the most broken or because it's the most untapped opportunity. And we start with new business versus net revenue retention. Now, I think if both are fundamentally broken, like if we're underinvesting in customer success, and we know that we're like not doing a good job of onboarding our customers and staying in front of them and identifying unhealthy accounts and addressing them, then I would make a very strong argument that it's very obviously going to be net revenue retention. I would also argue that if you fix net revenue retention, then you know what new customers to bring in and how to bring those customers in. And you've got great customer stories and validation and good word of mouth in the market. And there's just so many reasons why I could say the answer is almost always net revenue retention. Unfortunately, when I have these conversations, the answer I'm given is almost always new business. Whatever that is, now we break this down from here. So then, okay, I'm on the phone with the CRO and they're like, we need to generate more new business. So, okay, do you need to close more of the deals that you're already putting in your pipeline, or do you need to generate more new pipeline? 9 times out of 10, the answer I get is we need to generate more pipeline. So I'll ask some questions. I'll say, well, what's your close rate? They say, well, it's 10%. Okay. What's your average sales cycle? It's 100 days. Okay. How many deals do you have in your pipeline today that are over 200 days? And they'll say, well, probably half our pipeline. And I say, okay, so you're telling me that we should put all of the resources that you have available into generating more pipeline when half of that pipeline you're losing. I mean, 10% is a terrible close rate. Unfortunately, it's not abnormal. And your salespeople are spending half their time chasing deals that they're never going to close. And so we want to take them down this path of identifying like, what's the thing that if we fix, it's going to give us like the best short-term results and also the best long-term results. And for me, that answer is most of the time going to be net revenue retention. And then we look at like, do we have a path to retain our customers? Like if we're not getting our customers healthy, then we're never going to have an opportunity to expand them. So I would start there. And then when you go into retention, it's like, I don't really care about QBRs and renewal process if the customer's not even healthy to begin with. So how do we onboard a customer and get them healthy? And then how do we measure customer health? And what do we do about the customers that are unhealthy? And I'm blown away at how oftentimes I'll talk to organizations that will say like, we don't have any measurement system to see which of our accounts are unhealthy. And then they'll say, well, we need to like integrate our backend database and do all these things. I'm like, that's cool. That could be like a Q2 next year initiative. But what if we just log into like your database that gives you all your data on your customers and just manually go through that data and just take our accounts and tag them red, yellow, green. Right. And then we go to the account managers like, here's all your red accounts and here's the step-by-step process that we outlined this morning to go take care of those red accounts. Like, so the go-to-market ops decision tree is like, how do we identify like the top priority? And then another piece of this is like, how do we take quick action and find quick and early wins instead of saying, well, we need to integrate our backend like database that powers our product with Salesforce so that we can like create a customer health score. It's like, that's cool, but like that might take 6 months. we could also just manually go through our accounts and identify the red ones and then come up with a very rudimentary process to say, this is exactly what we need to do with our unhealthy accounts to get them healthy. And by the way, like these renewals are in 9 months, like today's the day. If we wait until it's a month away from the renewal, we have zero chance of saving that account.
There's a lot that you can do in quote unquote manual, like non-automated. By the way, no AI required to just go through your accounts. Like literally look at your list of accounts, give me a broad red, yellow, green, and then give me a plan that says, what are you going to do to get the reds not red? And that is a extremely useful exercise for any leader. I like the way that you're phrasing this, though, in terms of it being a go-to-market ops exercise, a go-to-market ops role. And it makes me think, like, how do we as post-sales, how do we as account managers use and tap into these kind of resources and have these sort of conversations? Because there's this conception out there that the RevOps people are just the people who run Salesforce reports, and I just go to them if I have a question, or they make me sit in on, half irrelevant training once, every January, as opposed to being an actual partner in the business and trying to figure this out. And the reason it's interesting to me is I haven't seen that many people, and this is kudos to you for building this out as a business. I haven't seen that many people who are on this side just say, boom, we're going to focus on the net revenue side. We're going to focus on retention and expansion because that's where the gold is. And so how do we work with these teams? Like how does an account manager become a buddy with the RevOps or GTM Ops team?
I am such a huge believer that like we take this concept like the go-to-market ops decision tree that I just outlined in combination with our go-to-market efficiency pyramid, and we sit down and we look at all the things that are broken in that area of go-to-market that needs the most attention, and we say, here is what we're going to do for the next quarter. We are going to outline our clear priorities, and we are not going to deviate from that. But if account management can make a case to RevOps and or the revenue leader to say, hey guys, we are leaving money on the table. Like this thing is very fundamentally broken. Why are you putting resources elsewhere?
Surfacing that data, putting a number on it, making the cost of inaction very clear, and then a specific request that we prioritize this.
Yeah. And I think like oftentimes, and this is where I think RevOps really falls short, is there's not usually like just one single simple like, point and click answer to this. Like if an account manager is saying, hey, we're losing all of these accounts because like we have this broken process, like unfortunately that takes a bit of effort to roll your sleeves up. Now this can happen pretty quickly, but like sitting down, and I wanted to like double click on this earlier, I think we mentioned $100 million company. So let's use that as an example. There's no way that if you go to a $100 million company that no one in the organization knows what it takes to make a customer successful. That is just impossible. But is that documented somewhere? Is that built into the systems and process? And does every account manager or CSM have that process right in front of them and they know exactly what they need to do? Those are two different things. And so to say like, hey, we are losing money because we are just dropping the most basic things. It's not a monumental lift to say like, let's get all the right people in the room and roll up our sleeves and just like outline what is the step-by-step process and what do we need to do to get the team to execute that process. But it is more than like, let me lob a request into RevOps. And it's really important to get executive alignment. Like I want to really, really emphasize this point. Most of what like my team does is a complete waste of time if the executive team is not behind it, right? So if we say, hey, this is the step-by-step process to get a customer healthy, keep them healthy, and then renew them, and then account managers aren't being held accountable to that. They're not empowered with the right tools. They aren't given the right training, and or executives are pulling them in different directions because they're not bought into this process, then nothing we do in ops is going to make any difference.
Essentially, that's at the heart of this whole discussion is, do people believe that the path to long-term profitable growth goes straight to the heart of their existing customers? Or do they believe that they constantly need to be shoveling new things in for everyone to deal with? And if they do believe that growth is from our customers, are we resourcing it appropriately? Are we doing all the things that we need to? Or are we still just running a very old playbook and wondering why it's getting so inefficient, why it's getting so much less effective than it used to, which is the case we're in now?
Yeah. And let me throw another thing out here. how many organizations have done a capacity plan for their account managers, CSMs, et cetera? How many of them can say, here's that step-by-step process, and this is how many accounts they can cover without dropping any balls?
Right now, we're in a period of what I call portfolio inflation, meaning every time I turn around and talk to another account manager, they're like, oh yeah, my portfolio used to be 5 and now it's 10, or it used to be 10 and now it's 20. And no one's getting any more resources other than they're getting a bigger book of business. Question for you as we wrap up here, Eddie, it's getting toward the end of the year. What is your playbook? What's your recommendation for setting ourselves up for success in 2026? So if you were talking to an executive team and helping them to get ready to go out there and kick some ass in the new year, what's your playbook for doing that? What should we be thinking of? What should we be thinking of today?
Well, it's planning season right now. So for next year, the first step is let's create an annual plan, and it's got to be bottoms up and not just top down. And so I mentioned like capacity planning and territory planning. So we need to understand like what is our revenue goal and what are the granular on the ground steps that we need to take, whether it's cold calls or responding to inbound leads or scheduling QBRs or reaching out to new stakeholders in existing accounts. And what capacity does our existing team have to go do those things? Then we have to have back and forth with the CFO, executive leadership, the board, et cetera, to like come to an alignment on here are the resources that we are going to give to go to market in order to go do those things. And if we have a bottom up plan and we say, for example, okay, we need to do QBRs with our tier 1 accounts and we need to do X, Y, Z, and each person on our team can do this with so many accounts, and we have this gap here, then we have to decide, do we hire more people? Do we say that gap is okay? And we should expect this much revenue from the organization. Now, there's lots of assumptions that go into that, and I don't mean to like go too deep on annual planning, but that's the heart of what we're trying to accomplish in an annual plan. In addition to that, we have our go-to-market efficiency pyramid. And this is where you can go in and look at whether it's inbound or outbound or net revenue retention. What are the fundamental steps that you need in place in order to do this, right? So like the first step is always ICP. Like, are we very clear on who we're trying to serve? And then what is that process? Like if it's net revenue retention, like what is our process to onboard a customer? What's our process to retain them? What's our process to identify an expansion opportunity and to work that expansion opportunity? Do we have that documented? Is everyone trained on it? If we ask 5 different people how that works, will we get 5 different answers or will we get one answer? And we've outlined this in great detail in our go-to-market efficiency pyramid. And you take that and then you build a go-to-market ops roadmap. And you say, okay, we've got a million things that are broken. What are the things that we need to fix first in order to execute that annual plan? And that becomes our roadmap for the quarter. And then ops is going to go in and say, okay, here are the specific things that we need to improve in order to execute our annual plan and hopefully hit our number at the end of the year. That's our playbook.
Well, that's the kind of thing that people should be thinking about, right? So the tools are there, and the more you exercise these tools, the more you do this stuff, you're setting yourself up for success going forward. If you're just winging it, if you're playing by the old rules, if you're using the old playbook from that you got in 1999, none of this stuff is going to be working anymore. So you need to put in the effort. And by the way, that's my final call to action here for account management leaders who are listening to this today, thinking, what do I need to do? Well, you need to spend time on these planning functions and capacity functions and understand the stress that you're putting on your teams with cutting resources, cutting team members, making the portfolios so much bigger and so on, and not having any clear playbooks. Like, not having clear playbooks is a recipe for very mediocre results. And that's something that I got loud and clear from this conversation with Eddie is documenting processes, having rigor around that is the tool for growth. So Eddie Reynolds, thanks for being here. Appreciate your thoughts, man.
Thank you for having me.